Anybody else on the panel want to address Pete
I'll just
Longstreet?
add one side effect here in terms of Longstreet's personality, and I think, Longstreet has been looked at in a different light by a lot of different historians and whatnot, but Longstreet wasn't the easiest guy to get along with. I mean, in terms of, you were a subordinate under Longstreet. At one point in the war, involving a big controversy with Micah Jenkins, involving a long series of disputes between the two in terms of who merited division, command, and so forth. At one point, Longstreet got up on his haunches and said to the administration, it's either him or you. You either do as I say in terms of court-martialing this officer, or I'm resigning. This is not well known about Longstreet, I don't think, but it is exactly what had happened. He threatened. Of course, Jenkins was killed later in the war, but which prevented the circumstances from coming to a peak. But there is a letter where Longstreet says to the administration, it's either him or me in terms of who you're going to favor. And that is reflective, I think, of man's, shall we say, relationship with others within his command.
As historians, we face a dilemma in that we come to know these people we write about sometimes too well. And we tend to become, even against our own better judgment, partisans of certain generals and attackers of others. It's very, very difficult to remain neutral in this. We all struggle with it. The Longstreet boom, if you will, that's been going on for a couple of decades now, will eventually run its course. And maybe we'll see a different school of thought arise. But I can't see genius at Chickamauga with Longstreet, contrary to what he wrote post-war, when hindsight for him was 20/20. Nor can I see genius in Lookout Valley, because once Lookout Valley is secured for the Union, the supplies begin to flow, the reinforcements come more easily, and the Confederacy, which already had a tough shot to defeat the Army of the Cumberland here in Chattanooga, is going to have even less and less of an opportunity. And when U.S. Grant comes to town and puts together an operation, he has to put together 3 disparate groups of federal soldiers. The Army of the Cumberland, which to many minds was discredited because of its alleged failure at Chickamauga. 2 corps from the Army of the Potomac that had their own failures alleged at places like Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, under a failed commander, Joseph Hooker, Joseph of California as he was denigrated, and a victorious group of folks from the Mississippi Valley under William T. Sherman. How well did these 3 armies work together? Peter?
Never even considered that. Kind of caught me off guard there. Knowing the troops from the Army of the Potomac arrived, they got a lot of flack from the Westerners as being, white paper collar soldiers and this and that, but that didn't last very long. I think that they got along pretty well. There were been occasions when they did fight together during the battles for Chattanooga. One of the divisions of the Army of the Cumberland fought under Hooker at Lookout Mountain. Howard helped reinforce Sherman who was flailing around on the northern part of Missionary Ridge. I think they got along just fine. I don't see any, that I can think of off the top of my head, any real problems between the three armies below the upper echelon.
Okay, Brooks?
Yeah, I'd agree that your question is how the three armies get along. Three armies seem to get along fine. I mean, they were kept in separate sectors, but when they are combined, when divisions are attached and the like, there doesn't seem to be any problem. The issue is going to be, I think, again, between the commanders of each of those groups and the top dog there, Ulysses S. Grant, in terms of we can see that afterwards, especially after the battle, and Hooker is very prominent in this, talking about Grant and Sherman in fairly negative terms, and of course always talking very well of Joe Hooker, as was his wont. That these generals did not get along very well, but I think sometimes because, you know, we've talked about this a lot so far this afternoon about the dysfunctional relationship between generals, we shouldn't necessarily project that down in terms of how the soldier in the ranks fought and performed in this battle. I mean, again, one of the things about this battle is how well Union soldiers fought.
Wiley?
Yes, I would agree completely. I think the soldiers were very accommodating in their attitude once they got to know one another. But the problem really, as Brooke has said here, is that there was a lot of ambition on the part of Generals Hooker and Grant and Rosecrans originally, and Thomas. They all had different personalities. They all had different ambitions and perspectives. And there was more, I think, friction, shall we say, at the top than there was certainly at the bottom. And, of course, the whole campaign, the way it worked out with the attack on Missionary Ridge after Sherman had failed in the so-called main effort of Grant on North Missionary Ridge, was just a byproduct of expediency on the part of Grant in doing something that to save the situation that looked like it was going to be a disaster as a result of the fight, Cleburne versus Sherman on North Missionary Ridge. And there is a remarkable story that cannot be overemphasized, I think, in terms of North Missionary Ridge, the fight of Cleburne versus Sherman, and Sherman's concepts and tactics and what he did there. And controversy, of course, will always occur there, but the fighting of Cleburne was just magnificent in my interpretation and almost won the battle for the Confederacy.
If I could add just one small point to that. Imagine you're a soldier in the Army of the Cumberland. You've been in Chattanooga on half rations and quarter rations, then what you can beg, some cases beg, borrow, or steal for a month. I think you're happy to see anybody wearing a blue uniform come. So even if you're inclined to have a low opinion of soldiers from the East, you're happy to see them.
I think that, as the panel has pointed out, the friction comes more between the leaders, among the leaders, than it does among the troops. Although I will say that the army that comes from the Mississippi, Sherman's forces, tend to have, I would argue, a little more of a chip on their shoulder in regard to the Army of the Cumberland. The same thing, the same phenomenon, however strong it might be, occurs in the Confederate forces, because you can find accounts from James Longstreet's people who come out and talk about the ragtag Army of Tennessee. Longstreet's reinforcements come out better uniformed, in some cases better equipped, and they say to their compadres out here, now that we're here, we can show you how to win victories, because the Army of Tennessee had not won very many victories up to that time. There will be all sorts of soldiers' letters joshing each other back and forth about who's the winner and who needs the help. There is also the argument among writers in the ranks that there's different characters of armies in terms of the Eastern armies and the Western armies. As I recall, one writer put it to the people who come from Virginia and winning under Robert E. Lee, yes, The Army of the Potomac stands firm, but when it breaks, it disappears. It runs away. The Army of the Cumberland breaks more easily than the Army of the Potomac, but it doesn't run as far away. It regroups more quickly. This is not something that's really tangible. It's the intangibles of how people see themselves and their organization. And the Chickamauga-Chattanooga campaign represents the amalgamation of units from all over the major theaters of the Civil War. And as a result, you can see the interplay among human beings a little more so than if they were just machines.
I think there might also be, this just occurred to me, I hadn't thought about this past, that the troops in those days, not only in the South but also in the North, there was a lot of regionalism, a lot of a very strong identity with your state as opposed to the country. The Army of the Cumberland was composed almost exclusively of Illinoisans, Ohioans, and Indians. The troops that came from the East were from Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, and two regions of the country that didn't get along necessarily all that well, socially or politically. So that, I think there may have been some resentment initially just based on people. New Englanders, abolitionists.
You can find soldiers' letters commenting on just that thing. Does it make any difference? The Union wins, the Confederates are routed, and the war moves on. It's time for us now to get to what does it all mean? What's the significance of the campaigns in this part of America in the summer and fall of 1863? Brooks, would you like to start?
I think, again, the significance is twofold. By the end of these campaigns, Chattanooga is a launching point for invasions into the Confederate heartland, and targeting specifically Atlanta. It's the obvious target in early 1864. The other thing this campaign establishes is that Ulysses S. Grant's the man. And there had Vicksburg, I think, secured Grant's command in the West, as opposed to all the conniving that had gone on beforehand. But I think after Chattanooga, a bill introduced in the House of Representatives on December 8, 1863, by Grant's political patron, Congressman L.E. Washburn, sets up the reestablishment of the rank of lieutenant general. And before long, in fact, there's an amendment to that bill that names Grant specifically as that person, overriding, in fact, Lincoln's power of nomination, because there's a fear, by the way, that Lincoln might actually put Henry Halleck in command with the third star. Now, Lincoln pulls that back and inspects Grant's presidential ambitions before he decides to name Grant. That bill, however, is not a Lincoln administration initiative. It's a congressional initiative in this era of struggle between executive and legislative branches of government. This was actually the legislative branch of government trying to take over from what they saw to be an ineffective chief executive for running the war, and they saw Grant as their man. So really, the end of 1863 establishes Grant as the coming man in the critical election year of 1864.
Wiley?
Well, I think one of the specific aspects of the campaign that a lot of people overlook is the psychological impact of the Chickamauga-Chattanooga campaigns. Here was a great victory, one of the greatest victories of the Confederacy at Chickamauga. The South expected great things in terms of the results of that battle. Maybe to the point of disrupting the Union armies that were at Chattanooga, or at least winning further victories. And all of a sudden it turns around at Chattanooga, and their army is disastrously beaten. Bragg has to make excuses in terms of his troops why they misbehaved on Missionary Ridge and so on and so forth. The psychological impact in the South was devastating, and it was one of the critical factors, I think, in terms of the wasting war of attrition, of not only losing more territory, but not being able to fully replace these losses and not being able to fully recover from a stunning disaster when they had expected victory and progress. And this psychological impact, so to think, I think, was one of the permeating factors that spread across the South to those who were aware of the circumstances that really impacted the future in terms of the wasting war of attrition.
Peter?
There was a strong faction in the Confederate High Command called the Western Concentration Bloc, arguing for what occurred before Chickamauga. Concentrate as many forces as possible in the West, and you can significantly disrupt or change the course of the war in the West, and then perhaps the course of the entire war. Chickamauga was their opportunity, and was a hollow victory. I wish I had my book with me, because I conclude with some comments by D.H. Hill, who he said that after Chickamauga, that the Atlanta, this Southern soldier, was essentially gone, and he fought, but without any real hope of success in the West. And as Hill put it, that the barren victory of Chickamauga sealed the fate of the Confederacy. Maybe a little hyperbolic. I can't really add anything to what Brooks or Wiley said in terms of the strategic impact of the victory at Chattanooga. One other, again, let's not forget Phil Sheridan. Sheridan's performance at Chattanooga really impressed Grant. Grant brought him east. Sheridan was Grant's boy in the East and went on eventually to become commanding general of the Army, commanding officer in the West through most of the Indian Wars. So we can't forget Sheridan. Chattanooga made the career of one of the most important generals of the 19th century.
Our time is expired. On behalf of the Tennessee Sesquicentennial Commission, I want to thank our panelists, Peter Cozzens, Brooks Simpson, Wiley Sword, and I want to thank you, the audience, for being so kind as to give us your attention this afternoon. Thank you.